The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight.
So, welcome to the Weird Tales radio show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Charles Christian, and with me is Janie. This is episode 26, the 19th July edition of the Weird Tales radio show. And we're here to take you on another foray into the world of ghosts, geeks, urban myths, magic, and folklore. It's top hats and brass goggles time, as in our big interview we talk to Melbourne, Australia-based writer and podcaster Madeleine D'Este about steampunk, the paranormal, Forteana, and the latest book in her Antics of Evangeline series. So, good to speak to you, and let's start off with a little bit about your own writing, your steampunk series.
Okay, so the Antics of Evangeline is a series of novellas set in a steampunk world in 1882 Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
So why I chose that was I actually saw a statistic somewhere, and I don't know whether it's actually true or not, but apparently in the 1880s, Melbourne was the second biggest city in the British Empire outside of London.
Oh, right.
Apparently.
Yeah.
So I'd been reading some steampunk at the time, some Gail Carriger, and of course I absolutely love Anno Dracula by Kim Newman.
Yeah.
And so I must have been having a patriotic moment as well. So I was going, why not Melbourne? Why not?
Yeah.
So that sparked the idea then, and also because at that time in the 1880s in Melbourne, it was just post-gold rush, and so there was an awful lot of money in Melbourne, and that period in Melbourne's history Melbourne was known as Marvellous Melbourne. So there was all this money, there's all this, and also known as Smelbourne, but that's another story.
Yeah, the drains probably hadn't caught up with the population explosion.
Yeah, and it does get awful hot here, so it's a bit nasty.
Yeah.
A lot of money around, and built some really beautiful, let us splash money around everywhere. So there's all these big, beautiful sandstone buildings that a lot of them are still there now. So, I'm walking around the streets of the centre of the city and I can see all these buildings that are still there. So that was kind of what sparked the setting. And then I think from a character perspective, Evangeline is kind of like a mixture of all my influences as a kid. So, or not so much a kid, so like Buffy and Anna Green Gables, and also I was quite inspired by the one of my very favourite episodes of Doctor Who, which is The Talons of Weng Chiang. So this all kind of moulded in together to create a fun character who is a little bit bored of a comfortable life in Melbourne and decides to go on some adventures.
Mm-hmm. Right, excellent. Yeah, I with the day job visited Melbourne a few years ago and stayed in, there's a hotel and conference centre that used to be a prison there, is there, in the centre, the old part?
An old prison. Oh, it's a bit further out of the city. Is that Pentridge? But it's a recently closed prison?
No, this was an old one in the very, very central part of it, where all the...
Oh, okay. There's an old jail, yeah.
Yeah. My main memory of that is I got taken to a stand-up comedy show somewhere on the outskirts and discovered that they do the reverse of the UK. In the UK, you put the warm-up acts on first and the headline act at the end. and there they put the headline act on at the beginning, and the acts got worse and worse as it went on, and they explained that's because people wanted to get home, and it was a long way out. So you didn't feel you were missing anything, but it was a bit perplexing as you sat there and the acts got progressively dire.
Yeah. I could, and also maybe they were expecting that maybe you got drunker as they went along, and you didn't notice as much.
Didn't notice. Yeah, that's possibly it. Yeah. So your Evangelines, they've got paranormal plot lines in them, haven't they? I mean, they're not just brass goggles and top hats type of thing.
No, they're not. So, yeah, I think that is this kind of mixing in of some paranormal stuff as well. So there's the four novellas, and the first one is about an alchemist. So there's some trying to pass off some fake gold post gold rush.
Yeah.
There's also the second one is about Evangeline and a bunyip.
Oh, right, yes. I've heard of it, but for people who haven't, just explain what a bunyip is.
I was gonna quiz you on your cryptozoology.
I seem to recall it's a sort of giant rabbit come kangaroo or something, isn't it?
Well, the interesting thing is that no one actually knows what it looks like.
Right. Oh, well, that's good.
So because traditional Aboriginal culture is oral, there's no kind of known picture of what it looks like. But yes, for those who don't know it, it's a mythical Aboriginal creature who lives in billabongs, which are like swamps.
Yeah.
And terrorizes people who come by the billabongs. So in my Evangeline adventure, there's a bunyip terrorising Melbourne, and the local paper puts out a reward to catch it, and so she decides to have a crack. Similarly with that one was also another thing where I was thinking here's a mythic beast in Australia that deserves a bit more kind of horror behind it. It's a scary thing, so that was another thing that I thought I might use that in a plot. And what are some of the other ones? Some of the other ones, the Evangeline and the Spiritualist includes some seances and all that good fun stuff, and some mummy unwrapping, which is also good fun. One of the really good fun things about this was also because Marvellous Melbourne was quite a centre at that time, so when it came to the Spiritualist novella, there was a tradition of I think Melbourne has one of the longest running spiritualist churches in the world, and it's still running from that period. And we even had a prime minister, someone who went on to be prime minister, who had been a member, quite an active member of that church.
Yeah, you don't think of that because I mean it's very much Victorian London and lots of seances and people exposing frauds and things, but we tend to over here in the UK tend to forget that the culture was worldwide. In Australia and in North America as well. The spiritualism craze. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we also forget that there was vast distances to travel and it took a long time, but obviously people were skipping from one country to another, so all this information was being moved around. So obviously we had all of the new arrivals here that because there was a gold rush, there was people coming from everywhere. So the people who probably came from California, and that's when we also got our first Asian immigration as well.
Yeah. And what is the steampunk element in them? I mean, is it just the setting, or do we have lots of zeppelins flying around and steam carriages and things?
It's probably a little bit light steampunk. So the fourth novella is it doesn't contain dirigibles, of course. So you had to get that in there somewhere.
Yes.
But it's I think I've used it also for some inventions as well. So Evangeline's long-lost father, who she reunites with. He's a professor and an inventor, and she starts to invent things herself under his, kind of apprenticeship. And so, there's a bunch of fun inventions for her to either, catch a bunyip or things like that. So, and there are elements of different technology, anachronistic technology within it, but it's not total steampunk, so it's probably steampunk light.
Yeah. And just going on to you, because you say on your website or your Twitter feed that you're interested in Forteana. Where did that derive from?
I don't know. It's. I've actually been asking one of my friends about this. It's a kind of over kind of coffee or a drink conversation. Is like, why do we like the dark stuff? Where does that come from? Some people seem to like rainbows and happy endings and things like that, whereas some of us are attracted to the weird and the unusual and the things that out the corner of our eyes, things like that. I think it probably started with maybe growing up on Doctor Who. I know that's not necessarily Forteana, but that kind of opened your eyes to all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of fantasy type things growing up. Even from a young age of like Enid Blyton and Roald Dahl, kind of strange things.
Mm-hmm.
And a TV show that was really quite popular when I was a kid, which some of my Asian friends now find quite odd, is a show that was a kind of cult show in Australia in the 70s and 80s, which was Monkey, which is about the monkey god.
Oh, I remember that one. Yeah. That showed.
Yeah.
That showed in the UK as well. That and there was another one, The Water Margins, as well, which is a bit earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Strange, oddly dubbed Hong Kong television series.
So that kind of, I think, also introduced me to things like, strange gods and dragons and, monsters and things like that. And then probably, then we start to get into the 90s and we start to, then Twin Peaks comes along and the X-Files and Buffy and all that stuff. I grew up in Tasmania and, we only had 3 TV stations. And only access to the library, of course. So it's
Yes.
down the bottom end of the world.
Yes.
But for some reason, Fortean Times would just someday appeared in our local news agency. So I was able to I found this magazine. I was like, wow, what the hell's this? It's full of all the really interesting, cool stuff. It's full of UFOs and strange urban legends and monsters and that really kind of whet my appetite from there.
You were saying about Tasmania when we were just exchanging messages before setting this call up. That's an even older settlement than Melbourne, isn't it? Or that's got a long tradition.
Yeah. So now let's hope I get my Australian history right. But so Sydney's the first one.
Yeah.
Sydney was the first settlement.
Yeah.
And then Hobart. So Van Diemen's Land, Tasmania from there. So and it has a very dark and kind of violent history. A lot of convicts. It was also the site of a genocide of the Tasmanian Aboriginals. They basically wiped them all out. And even leading up to more recent times in the 90s with the massacre at Port Arthur. Mm-hmm. And it also has a very of most places in Australia, it has a real European feel because it's quite south, so it's leafy and green, but it's also misty and cold.
Yeah.
Or in our context, cold.
Yes.
So it's perfect for ghosts and strange kind of gothic elements.
Yeah. Have you ever had any encounters with anything like that yourself? Anything, supernatural experiences or anything?
Well, we lived in a house which was in the centre of Hobart, and it was, I know it's not that old compared to some of the stuff that you've got.
Yes.
But I think it was built about 1860.
Yeah.
And as with happens with some of these old houses, there was the one room that was just a bit weird. You know, the room that was cold, that no one really liked to use. So we had it as a formal dining room, and I can barely remember us using it that often. You know, even when it was Christmas, there was just, I don't know, there was just something funny about that room.
Right. Yeah.
And one I didn't experience anything while awake, but I did have a very vivid dream, which I can actually remember very clearly even now, about a man standing behind the door. So, you know, just standing there. And it actually still gives me chills even thinking about it now or talking about it. So that's probably the closest I've come to in Tasmania.
Yeah.
I also once had an experience of once I was in Byron Bay, which is the kind of hippie yuppie centre of Australia.
Yes.
So, you know, think spiritual healing and yoga retreats and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I was at a yoga retreat, and I had a spiritual healing session, and actually saw the practitioner or whatever. I saw her face change. So that was a pretty bizarre experience to actually see her face. Because in the moment, I thought, oh wow, she really looks like this person that I knew, and I thought I didn't notice that when I first walked in. And I was like, wow, she really looks like him. I wonder if she's related to him. And then the session finished, and she turned up the lights, and she looked nothing like him.
How weird.
Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things off the top of my head that's happened. So, you know, those kind of things that spur me on to look at more things like that.
You are listening to the Weird Tales Radio Show with Charles Christian on internet radio and podcast.
Tell us a bit more about your other writing activities and what else you do besides the Evangeline books.
So I have a podcast that I run as well, which is interviewing writers. So that's called Right Through the Roof. So that's good fun. So I basically started that so that I could have an excuse to contact people and ask them questions that I wanted to know the answer to. So that, you know, it's kind of selfish, really. That's all I wanted to do it.
Yeah. I think I can hear a bunyip barking in the background where you are.
Yeah, no, it's the dog next door. Shut up. What else do I do? So I've got a few pieces, so longer novels that I'm trying to get published. So one of those a feminist fantasy, another one that I'm just finishing that I'm actually getting someone to do a manuscript assessment right at this moment, which is a young adult high school horror set during a production of Macbeth.
Right, that would be appropriate enough, yes.
Yeah, which is also actually set in a thinly veiled Tasmania, so that's bringing in some of those other elements, but, you know, amping it up, of course. Also, what else have I done? So I have a book review podcast on that's just a very short couple of minutes weekly on an internet radio station called Art District Radio.
Yep.
And I've just finished it now, but I did a 10-part series on the common origins of superstitions for Folklore Thursday. So if you look for that, you can find that on their website. So I went through, you know, the big ones, the knock on wood, the cross your fingers, you know, opening umbrellas, shoes on the table, all those kind of things. So I went through and researched where they came from.
That's always fascinating to discover where these stories come from, to start with. I mean, it's like some of the urban myths out there that you find that different people in different countries at different times still have the same urban myth. Is one that crops up about somebody trying to mug you in a car park and you drive away, and when you finally finish and get back, you see that their fingers are sort of trapped in the door handle. I've encountered that one, but it's one of that's what do they call it? Folklore, friend of a friend law. It's always somebody who knew somebody else who knew somebody else who said it happened to me. Yes.
Yeah. And going back through those superstitions are just some of them were just really, really interesting. That apparently, when now we cross our fingers, at one point the actual sign for luck was to cross your legs.
Right, yeah.
And one of my favourites was, which I'm not sure whether it's widely known, is about the shoes on the table, because that was one of the ones that that I grew up with. It was like, oh no, you never put shoes on the table. And even new shoes. And I always thought, oh, look, that actually makes sense from a hygiene perspective. Really, you don't actually want your dirty old shoes on the table. But some of the origins they think they are is that one of them was about how the tabletop is similar to the gallows, and convicts were hung with their boots on. So, that the shoes hitting the table was similar to getting hung.
Right.
And another potential origin was, I think, in mining communities, that they would do that as an homage to anyone who had died in the mine, that they would leave their boots on the table.
Right. Because, that shoe thing, there was all that fuss some years ago when US President George Bush was in a press conference and a Iraqi journalist, I think it was, threw a shoe at him, and it was explaining that this was a great insult, and presumably it follows on from the same thing. Yeah, so showing the soles of your shoes is seen as a kind of great insult. Yeah.
And similarly in Asian culture, I think it was not having your shoes up high, so because that means someone's walking over you.
What other ones did you did that are less well known? Or
I actually picked a list of that I did find the top 10 and thought I'd look into them specifically.
Yeah.
And some of them are quite practical, like like not opening an umbrella inside. There was kind of harking back to I think it was Egyptian goddesses and things like that, but then also the fact that the original or the kind of Victorian mechanism in umbrellas was a bit dodgy, and so might just poke someone in the eye.
Yes, where they sprang out. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yes, it's that fascinating thing how some of them appear to have a practical point of view and others appear to have a as you're saying with the shoes, you'd think, well, yeah, shoes that you don't know what you've trod in, you wouldn't want them on the table, but there's still the mystical side to them as well. They're sort of reinforcing it, or you sort of wonder whether which came first, sort of chicken or the egg. Was it the practical side of it, don't open that umbrella because you'll have someone's eye out, or was it a mystical side and the practical bit followed on from it?
Yeah, actually, I think one example of that was broken mirrors. So mirrors and streams and reflections has all those kind of myths going back to Greek myths and all of that. So there's always been that kind of otherworldly thing about seeing your own reflection. But then in some of the research that I did when it came to actually the superstition of 7 years bad luck when you break a mirror, some people argued that it had been perpetuated by, to warn the clumsy servant, because the mirrors were quite expensive. So it didn't have this mystical past. It was more about, what will happen if you trip over and break that. You're going to get 7 years bad luck and I'll probably sack you, rather than it being this kind of mystical thing.
That's good. Yes. And of course, there is that thing that for a long time, when you didn't have mirrors, people didn't know what they looked like, did they? Yeah, it must be, but we didn't have photography, didn't have anything else, so it would have all been. And of course, there is that thing in the mirror that you are wrong way around, aren't you? The reflection. How you look in a mirror is not how other people see you in real life.
Yeah, true. I haven't really thought much about that. That's really interesting.
Now, leave it to me to think up something totally obscure on that. But
Now my writer brain goes, ooh, what can I do with that?
Yes. Brilliant. Okay, so where are you going next with Evangeline?
Well, I don't know.
Oh, right. Well, that's fair enough. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Yes.
So I've got a few. I started writing her as I was doing a kind of grim dystopia that actually went nowhere, and I needed a break, and so Evangeline was kind of fun, and then it was an experiment in self-publishing. So I did the 4, and I still have a few drafted, and I did do a Christmas story, a short story for my mailing list last year. So that they are there, and I do occasionally get ideas for new stories, but I'm not sure when I'm going to get around to her again.
Right. Oh, well. Leave your readers in suspense. What happens to Evangeline? She's stuck in a dirigible with a bunyip, heading out over the Pacific.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, Madeleine, it's been a delight talking to you. Best of luck with your books and projects in the future.
Thanks a lot, Charles.
Okay, then.
Thank you.
That's it. Janie and I look forward to joining you again. But until then, pleasant dreams, safe travels, and remember, there's nothing to fear. We're just all ghosts driving meat-coated skeletons made of stardust as we ride on a rock, spinning through outer space.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. Keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com or by email at urbanfantasist.icloud.com or on Twitter at Christian Uncut. Good night. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show.